Our next session, again, we are still kind of on the topic of AI, but going back to, I think, some of the nitty-gritty around data. So this one is getting government data ready for AI. And obviously, we've been talking a lot about governments wanting to use AI, but actually some of the data that is feeding some of the new technology and the use of AI is still kind of lagging behind in terms of kind of it's a year out of date, the data that can be used. So today I think we're going to be talking about what does government need to do to get that data ready, to get the most current data possible in the place that it needs to be so that it can be used to maximise the full potential of new technologies, including Gen AI. We do have another great panel with us here today. I'm going to keep following the same format because you've been great with your questions, so please do think about your questions as we are hearing from our speakers, and I will throw it open to you again once we've heard from our 4 speakers. So we have with us here, we've got Beata Lisowska, who is Chief Data Architect for the NHS. We've got Ankur Saini, who is Deputy Chief Technology Officer at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, who has come all the way from the United States Department of Transportation. So great to have you with us here today, sharing some insights from your department over there in America. Then we've got Charles Baird, who some of you may have just heard on the other session as well, who is the Chief Data Architect at the Office for National Statistics, putting in a double stint for us here. And then we have Ravinder Singh, who is Head of Digital and Data Systems, at the Cabinet Office Government Commercial Function. So again, we have a really great panel with us here, lots of expertise and experience. Please do keep your questions coming. I'm going to kick off by asking you, Beata, in your area, how are you preparing data for AI? And obviously, we've heard a lot today about the challenges facing the NHS, so there's huge kind of issues there, and I think AI is going to be one of the solutions to some of those challenges, but really important that data is kind of where it needs to be able to maximize that potential.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So I think I would take us back to what sort of AI we're talking about in here, what sort of data we need, what is your use case. I think that in any organization, before that I was with Camden Council, before that I was working for ONS. So looking at actually the data landscape, I feel that now that the future of the AI is here, it's really highlighted some of the problems that we have had. And it's not only common to NHS, it's kind of common to all the organizations, which is now that we are bringing all those new tools, we are starting to look at the quality of the data, and you start to dig deeper about, do you have the right data governance there, do you have the right data management associated with this. In fact, I feel that actually with the advent of AI, job profiles such as data ethicists or data governance managers, should be so sought after because they're so needed to set out all those right processes in place. And if you think about how majority of the organizations, they have been problem-driven, right? You had a problem, and then you looked for a solution. The solution that we had on the market was a technical solution, which meant that you would get a software, you would get a system, you would get all your core processes on it. But what would mean, looking forward to this, is that you're actually building a silo around yourself, right? And obviously, back then, and any organization that is more older than 10 years will face the same sort of problem, that complex data landscape is really difficult to manage. And so this is where I feel that data hasn't been properly architected. Obviously, I'm a chief data architect, so I'm going to tell you that the answer in here is in proper data architecture. And I do believe in that, actually. I do think that, this old-fashioned DAMA data architecture principles, they're still valid, and now actually even more so than before. If you think about, so to give you an example, If you are thinking about using AI tool to help you take notes, if you're a care worker and you're speaking to a resident and you want to be more relational, you want to have a nice little summary, you don't want to take notes, you want to focus on the conversation at hand so that you don't miss anything, right? Which is great. But if you think about this, you have just generated data by a tool. You might want to link that data to something else. How are you going to link this? So how are you linking all that data from all the different systems together? How are you going to govern this? How are you, for example, going to make sure that everything that you have just done is done safely and securely, with privacy and anonymity at its heart, right? But still not blocking that future insight. So I feel that this is where, this is where we need to do something about building that. We call it in NHS England target data architecture, which kind of puts together all those key components of the data architecture and on steroids, and try to apply it to our platform modernization, to our rationalization, to making our data ready, to ensuring that the data that we are collecting, actually, do we still need to collect all of that data? How about data retention? These are not new questions. These are questions that you can get an answer for in that rooted subject of data architecture. So I think that these would be my opening remarks on this.
Yeah, thanks, Piers, because a reminder, you need to get those basics right, I think. And interesting what you said there, that actually some of the new technologies and the new tools will actually generate even more data.
Absolutely.
And then what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to manage it and link it? And you've raised so many issues we can come back to in the questions around security, privacy, the safety of that data, but also how is it governed and managed, as well as the quality. And do we have the right people that we need to be able to do all of those things? Thank you so much for a great way to set the scene, lots of kind of issues that we'll come back to. Ankur, before I ask you to talk about kind of getting data ready, I wonder if you could just give us a little bit, because we might not be as familiar with your organisation as we are with some of the ones in the UK. So a little bit about what you do in the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration.
I'm glad you asked, because I'm about as familiar now that, as I should have been in 4 years, because before I started, I wasn't familiar with FMCSA. So Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is a long way of saying this is the branch of U.S. Department of Transportation that regulates large trucks and buses.
Okay.
Right? Freight moves on trucks in U.S. We have about 800,000 registered motor carriers, aka trucking companies, with over 7 million trucks that are on the U.S. roads. In my capacity, I am responsible for designing technology solutions and products that help those companies register with us, carry out their life cycle, which includes inspections, investigations, and then we work hand in hand with all state law enforcement agencies to take enforcement actions where possible. So in a nutshell, we are managing the life cycle of trucking companies as they operate on roads. A few years ago, the entire department made a strong commitment to a vision called Vision Zero, which means we are committed to having 0 fatalities on roadways. Noble cause. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but it's a challenging ask. As I said, the freight in U.S. moves on trucks. There's a lot of miles that are logged in, and every year about 6,000 people die in crashes that are directly attributable to large trucks and buses. And it's our goal to get them down to 0. I think in the morning, I believe it was Tariq that mentioned, having a North Star vision. For us, everything we do from AI to non-AI stuff, our North Star is, does it help save a life, right? So it's what guides us, it's what wakes us up every morning and helps us deliver on the mission that we have.
Thanks, that's really interesting, setting it out like that. And then in that area, we've touched on kind of technology and data in all policy areas. So give us a sense of some of the areas where improving the way you use data and maybe deploying AI is already being used in this sector.
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit more context. FMCSA is also one of the younger agencies within the US federal government. We only came into existence in 2000. And while the agency is new, the trucking business is not new. You know, interstate commerce has existed for over 100 years in US. So we used to be a part of federal highways, and we were broken off because the mission was significantly different from what it is today.
Yeah.
So as a part of that breaking off, we didn't really get our own systems.
Right.
Right? So we basically repurposed what was there before, and that has kind of evolved, if you want to call it evolved. It's more like Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. And they work, but they don't work to what needs to work. And we're on an extensive transformation slash modernization journey. So a part of which is reimagining how work is done, and reimagining how we register companies, how we inspect them, how we carry out our investigations, and how we share data with law enforcement agencies that help them do their jobs better. So while we are reimagining these things, we came to the conclusion that our data does not serve our needs because of how siloed it is. I mean, it's Conway's law, right? The communication structures of our organization represented systems. People didn't like other people, so they built their own things, and they don't talk to each other as well.
Yeah.
And it's a vicious cycle that repeats. We were trying to break that, and we're trying to manage the life cycle of a carrier, a life cycle of a law enforcement agency person in our system, so that they get everything they need to get in one-stop shops. Right?
Yeah.
Our modernization is not to replace 50 applications with another 50 applications that need to be replaced in another 5 years based on the pace of technology. Our vision is to establish these platforms where, if I'm a law enforcement person, I go in and I get everything I need.
Yeah.
Do not ever have to log into any other application again. So what we've done is we've built a data lake that feeds into a data warehouse, and we can create very specific data marts for very specific use cases. And we are building our data pipelines into the data lake from each of the transactional systems that record the registrations, inspections, and investigations. As we are modernizing new things, we are taking away the dependencies from the individual siloed systems, and we are putting everything back in the lake. Not only is that giving us efficiencies in terms of correlating other data sets, what it's also doing is it's establishing an authoritative source of truth, a gold copy of our data. Because right now, the state of the data is it gets copied and pasted all over the place for analysis, right? So if you run a report in 4 different systems, depending on when it was copied and pasted, because it's all different frequencies, you may get 4 different results. A lot of our work ends up in court because of enforcement. You put somebody out of business, they go appeal it. If you go to court with the same report with 4 different numbers, you're definitely losing the case, right? Because there's no authenticity to anything you're doing. So that's going back to what Beat was saying. Going back to foundations, fixing the foundational elements, that's where the focus is.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Really interesting that both of you mentioned those siloed systems being such a big problem, and you kind of started to describe that, which I think a lot of people will maybe want to know a bit more about, is how do you move to then a newer, cleaner system while still having the old system functioning for you? So I think that's a challenge that everybody is facing, I think, nowadays. Thank you so much. Charles, coming to you. So sitting where you do, kind of in ONS, all about data, give us a sense of kind of what the areas you're focusing on in terms of getting data ready for this new world of Gen AI. And do you have any kind of guidance, or are you working with departments on any of this?
Yes, well, let me start by saying don't never do 2 slots back to back. So I've used all my good data jokes now in the first thing, so this might be a bit dry. But ONS is a big data-intensive organisation. We're slightly unusual in government in that we are kind of net receivers of data, if you like, in terms of we need to bring all this admin data in to be able to produce statistics, to be able to do analysis. So there is, by nature, a lot of collaboration with other departments and a lot of work on, again, the foundations of how do you standardise what data look at, how can you agree data standards, how can you start to minimize the amount of transformation that needs to happen to data as it moves from organization to organization. So there's a lot of cross-government work that we do in partnership with the Central Digital and Data Office to drive those data standards. In terms of getting data, in terms of then kind of taking that and integrating it, there is something which I'll briefly mention in passing, because otherwise I'll just talk about it for the whole session and no one wants that. That we have got a product called the RDMF, the Reference Data Management Framework, which is something that indexes data in such a way that it can be de-identified and shared in a de-identified way, but still used for analytical purpose, linked for analytical purpose when it comes. So in that kind of, how are we collaborating with other government authorities? That's a big start of that, which is how can we enable better data sharing in a more safe and secure way? And I think that's the lead into AI here, right? So I think the big nervousness on the part of departments is that their data, which is very sensitive, which they're rightly protective of, and which they are on the hook for a lot of the time, they don't want to see it fed into big new AI models that they don't understand. That there's a lot of good press about AI, but a corresponding amount of bad press about the black box, where data goes in, don't really know what happens to it, and then something comes out the other end that's vaguely related. And so a lot of the work we do is on evaluation. We work in my division and with colleagues in our data science campus to think about proofs of concept for AI, which can be evaluated according to quite a strict set of criteria about both all of the usual stuff, appropriateness and the ability to track how things are used, but also ROI. Is it worth? GenAI is expensive, I think, which is something we don't often talk about. It's a lot more expensive than traditional machine learning processes. It uses a lot more compute, and so it's also a lot less sustainable, and sustainability is one of our kind of core mantras. So we do need to be quite robust in our evaluation of, is this an appropriate thing? And actually, I am going to use an anecdote that I used in the last one, which is, I apologize to those of you who've heard it before. One of the things that we're doing as an example is we've got a machine learning based algorithm to classify data according to certain reference data standards, so which allows better analysis of it. We developed with the data science campus a way to use GenAI to do that, and in certain use cases it came up with a more accurate result. And so we were looking at our machine learning approach had a 70% accuracy rate, and again, that is really good for classifications, trust me. And then this one came up with like a 76, 77%, but it was also 300% more expensive. Right. So we're having to develop a workflow which says, okay, that's great, because there are times that when we're producing official statistics, a jump to 77% is worth 300% increase in costs. But for more general analysis, it's not. So we've had to work out a way that you can have a technical flow that both uses these things and but has got that kind of inflection point between the two. So again, that's the point I would like to land, I think, mainly is the importance of that, the evaluation of what you're doing with this stuff, as well as I completely agree with the foundational stuff about data architecture that you do need to make sure your data is standardized going into it, but you also need to understand the cost.
Yeah, and I mean, that came up in one of our other sessions, I think, which was, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for using new technologies and AI in particular, but we do need to have a system for prioritising and understanding when it's appropriate and when it isn't to be using some of these, definitely. Thanks. And then Ravinder, coming over to you. So sitting where you do in the government commercial function, give us a sense there of kind of how are you already looking to improve your data there to deploy AI, and are you deploying AI already in some areas?
In government commercial function, we are currently, we train all government commercial officers and certify them or accredit them across government. And if you are one of them, probably you have done the certification on our platform, Government Commercial College. So here we are at the cusp of using AI into our more of behavior analysis and all that stuff going forward. The challenge what we have in previous role and current role is, what I have found is within the government is kind of the data which is there when we talk about that is what's the data set you are having with you, how vast the data set is, and do you really know your data assets? So that's a real challenge because when you start studying about, okay, what are the data assets you are having, what kind of prioritization you are going to, what's the problem statement you are going to solve. So first have that problem statement in ready, and then get the data according to that, yeah, this is what I'm going to solve, this is the data which would be suitable for this purpose, and then you can build your architecture based on that data model, data algorithm. Because if you don't select the right algorithm, right model, then the output will not be efficient. As Charles said, it may be consuming more power, more money, more time, and you will not get the outcome which you really want. So understanding your data assets and also going from that data assets, what's the kind of data quality and the vastness of that. And if you are really manage that side of things, then probably you will be able to get any machine learning algorithm can work better on that. So if you have done your basics right and understood your architecture, build the right relationships, whether it's object oriented or otherwise, whatever technology you want to put, but first understand that this is my problem statement, this is my outcome I want, and in between, these are the steps which I need to do, algorithm, model, and what are the data sets I'm going to use to solve that problem. So that's how we are trying to overcome and go forward with our priorities, that yes, this is what's the problem statement we are trying to solve, and then we are trying to have those data assets ready for that.
Thanks. So again, it's that basics of what is it you're trying to do, and even before you get into how are you going to manage, store, and is understanding what data what your data assets are. So really, some of the fundamentals there. Thank you so much. I'm coming over to the audience for questions. So any questions? Yes, we have a gentleman down here, and then I'm looking, make sure because there's lights in the back, and then a lady over there. So we'll take the question down here first. And then if we have another, I'm not sure, if not, we'll take the mic over there after. Thanks.
Yeah, Chris Allen from the Government Office of Tech Transfer. So we heard a bit about training AI and that sometimes discovering and amplifying bias. Government data is unbiased, isn't it? It's all going to be unbiased. No, I just wondered if we had an insight into what sorts of bias we've got to look out for in that government data that we're collecting, so that we don't make the same mistakes that we've come across in other areas of AI trained on big data.
Thanks. A really good question, because the title was all about getting data ready for AI. So what kind of potential biases should we be looking for in the data? Who wants to kick off?
It feels like
Charles, you look like you're ready for this one.
Just stay very quiet because it's the lesson there. It's a really good question. I think there was a good question in the previous one about data quality, right? So I would say these things are linked, because we would say that you can put most data in front of an analyst, provided that you're really clear about what the content of that data is, how it's been collected, where there are weaknesses, things like that. It's that quite detailed, quite specific stuff about the makeup of the data set that allows an analyst to say, okay, so we can perform analysis, but we appreciate that it's going to have this bias on. I don't believe there's such a thing as an unbiased data set, because I don't believe there's such a thing as perfect collection or perfect retention. So we're always going to have problems, especially when, in my job, we're thinking about data sets that are population sized, right? We are running things for the entire country. Once you start to think about 60 to 100 million records, a fraction of a percentage point puts you into very significant error and bias. And we know that we don't have perfect coverage over underserved communities, over certain areas of the country, and that goes different for whether you're talking about environmental or socioeconomic. So I think that aiming for perfect data is going to lead to madness, or at least that's what I keep telling my boss. And as long as we are very clear and very precise about how we specify where we see that limitation in the data, and so a lot of the work we do with the CDDO, for instance, is about data quality standards. How can you communicate this in a standardized way so that it is both clear to an analyst or a downstream user of the data, but also machine readable, so that as it's going into these models, there can be adjustments made for that. And hopefully, as we get into Gen AI is a massive text parser, right? There should be an element of, if we make clear this, you can use it to tweak the models.
Yeah, I can add to that is you have data sets that you want to remove the bias is probably training of the model. That's very important, that how you are training the model. Are you really confident that yes, you have trained it enough now that there is no bias, that human intervention initially may be required, whether it's supervised learning, unsupervised learning, how you would like to train that model. So the training of that model of your machine learning is very important to get the right outcome, so that you now can really say that it's without bias.
So, and I'll add to the training piece a little bit. I think it also, from a philosophical aspect, right, it needs a little bit of a courage to even acknowledge that there's bias, right? Yeah. Because data from the past is not safe from AI, right? Once you analyze it and you realize that something that you've been selling for 20 years, that you've been doing a stellar job over 20 years, and you come back and say, some underrepresented minority has been impartially or partially persecuted for the same things other people have not been, do you acknowledge that? And if you don't, how are you going to fix the bias, right? So there's a little bit of a political battle that needs to be fought with acknowledging bias and then correcting it, because if you don't acknowledge, you can't correct.
And I would actually build on that and think about like how we are actually monitoring this and put equality assessments as part of this process as well. And and actually that's something, shout out to Camden Council, we used to do in there actually, and start thinking about monitoring that bias, being really transparent about this and then reporting on it as well. But like you said, it takes courage.
Yeah, really interesting point there about acknowledging the bias in the first place before you can correct it. We've got two more questions. So I've got a lady there and then gentleman down the front here, and I'm just checking there's no more coming in.
My question is, like, for an organization which is, quite nascent in their AI/ML journey, what do you think from your perspective, what are the key inhibitors, for those organizations to develop their use cases and imbibe AI in their organization? And what do you think should be the key priorities they need to consider, whether it's cost or whether it's people, whether it's skills or culture? If you can highlight, a couple of those.
So I guess this is quite a big question in some ways, because we've touched on a lot of what are the barriers to AI, I think, in implementing AI. But what you're saying is, if you had to rank them in a way, what would you say the biggest kind of barriers are? Beata, I'll start with you.
I think what Charles was talking about return on investment is a very, very valid point. And even though AI, it depends, right? I'm going to be a stickler for what do we mean by AI? And depending on the use case, you need to really think about how is that going to fundamentally change how you're operating? Is it going to change? Is your culture ready, and data maturity, is it ready for this step? Because it's not going to be answer for all the problems you might have, and it might, for example, help in a minuscule use case and look really great and shiny, but in a great scale doesn't change or move your organization like a little bit, like that massive steps forward.
And I think building on that, there'll be the issues where it would have huge impact,
Absolutely.
but you're just not ready to do it because you don't have the foundations in place.
So I'll say something that Laura said in the last panel, right? I don't think AI should be approached as everybody's doing AI, so I should do it, right? Why are we doing AI? Have we reached if we are doing AI for, let's say, a productivity use case, have we reached the maximum of human productivity? If not, if adding 2 people helps you, just add 2 people. Right? Why automate something that takes 5 minutes for a person to do? Right? So we need to be really clear about why we are approaching AI, and is that convergence of human and machine needed at this very moment? And if it's not, I think waiting is okay. Like, I'll tell you from personally, somebody comes to my office, what are we doing there? Nothing. That's my answer. Because I know the conversations we are having here and everywhere else, the AI conversations have been going on for the last 10, 15 years. It's the consumerization of AI through ChatGPTs and the co-pilots That's what has been brought up over and over again over the last 18 months. Because, in my arena, we've been talking about autonomous driving for years at this point. Automatic driver assist systems for years at this point, right? So we are literally playing with not just AI, but AI and robotics combined. We have a grant with the Virginia Tech Institute. They have a great program for the roadways. And they're doing a recognition of emergency vehicles, autonomous trucks. As soon as they see a vehicle, pull in the side, pull over, maneuvers, and all that stuff. So we're playing with AI, but every time I have a conversation with somebody, it's usually, how can I automate speech writing using ChatGPT? Right, like that's the kind of yeah. So it's more consumerization of AI and putting it in hands of everybody else. That's what is nascent.
Yeah.
The people that are doing machine learning have been doing machine learning for a while.
Exactly.
So
Charles Ravindra, and then we've got the final question down here.
So I completely agree with that, and I think that getting to that use case is the most important thing. Let's not just do this because it's new and shiny. Because there's that famous stat about 80% of enterprises have started an AI program and 5% of them have taken something into production. I think there hasn't been a natural AI or Gen AI shaped hole in workflows that is filled by this thing. So one of the things we've been quite successful at is thinking about how could we use this as a force multiplier for specialists. So for instance, we've got a program at the moment that's evaluating whether or not you can take some of the frankly quite boring tasks I sometimes ask data architects to do, like metadata mapping or schema generation or translation on top of new data sets. That a lot of that, to be blunt, is copy and paste work and going through and going, this means that, this means that. We're testing at the moment, could you do that? Could you speed that up with a Gen AI? And we're getting really good results. And I think even if we weren't, I'd still be quite tempted by it because it is a way to automate something that my specialists find quite boring. So it's improving the quality of their life. So that is a strong use case. And I think the classification is one I talked about otherwise, but we also have quite a number of failed projects, right? Where I think you have to be quite ruthless and say it's fine to spin up a proof of concept, but test it and evaluate it from the beginning. And if you're not getting something useful out of it, kill it. Don't be sentimental about these things.
That's Ravinder.
Yeah, as Charles said, we used to say in GDS that fail fast. That's the first thing, that yes, you have to learn from mistake and okay, this is not going to go anywhere, let's fail. And second is, I think for nascent organization, as you said, this kind of skills and training gap is still there, that finding the right skill, right opportunity, right tools, which we can implement to deliver a right solution for the organization. So that's what you need to find out, that, okay, you can call off large language models, but what is that? Is there a private LLM which can work for you, a smaller model? Work on those models. If you can work on those models and work for your organization, like I have seen in the departments while I was working across departments, they have done that repetitive task like call center calls, which are they can be done by a chatbot easily now, similar to ChatGPT. So use that kind of understanding that which are those tasks which can bring on more efficiency and effectiveness in running the organization, and to take those use cases forward and start with a small private LLM and then make it big.
Thanks. And we've just got time for the final question here.
Chris Page from BDK. I'd like to just narrow us down for a second and getting government data ready for conversational AI. It's about to become very easy, like a single click, to switch on a conversation with a document library, for example. So I was wondering what the views were on how to generate a set of questions and answers that you would expect to be able to be answered by this particular data set that you've got, and whether that is automatable. Because you can certainly automate the testing of the model by something like prompt flow or something, but actually generating the questions and answers you believe are answerable from this data set.
Who would like to pick that up? So it's how do we get data ready for conversational AI?
Yes.
New type of AI that's coming along. Is anybody familiar with this and who would like to answer?
Come on, Ravinder.
Ravinder.
I mean, I'll go if you guys are going. You first. So if you guys figure it out by then. So we in my space, we have federal motor carrier safety regulations that their books are like this big. If you attach two to a bar, I can probably not bench press them. So there's pretty heavy regulations. Trucking community ranges from your UPS, FedEx, DHLs of the world to mom and pop truckers who are owner operators. They own a truck and they're also the company. So the understanding of those regulations and how people have to comply with them is a challenge, right? Not everybody's master's degree, bachelor's degree, they're not educated. Some people even can't read. So to disseminate that information in a very easy way, chatbots, prompts, all those things can help. And I personally know of a few organizations in the States that are working on those private LLMs where you take a large language model that is trained on general English language, and then you add context based on your FMCSRs, in our case, the regulations, or other things that are terms that are very specific to trucking operations and the language that the operators would use, so that when they ask a question in that language, the model understands and it responds with the response. So that's how we're approaching that.
Thanks. Good.
The question though is how do you actually generate questions that can validate that is working?
So I would, and possibly still not answer your question, but we'll give it a go.
Just to say, we've got 1 minute left.
Very quickly give it a go. I would come back to an approach that we're trialing that's data products, right? So one of the things we're trying to do is not just share massive data sets across government or more widely, but get to a stage where we are producing artifacts that can serve certain purposes. So why are you doing this? What are the questions this data set is designed to answer? And how can we prepare that for somebody? So I think there's a general purpose thing here where we'd say, okay, so we've taken this data set from HMRC or from DWP, we have prepared it for an analyst's use to answer the following question. And that allows us to say to the LLM, what answers would you give to these questions that we've prepared this for the analyst? So I think there's a neat dovetailing there, which is handy because we were doing the first one anyway.
Brilliant. Ravinder, did you want to add anything in the last?
Just to add to that is that understanding from your previous questions, which have been fed from your, let's say, call center, there have been all questions if you feed those to the LLMs, those are your question set, and that can be your conversational AI.
Yeah, the idea is like if you just had a data set, like the example of the things, you really want to know what questions it can answer, questions it can't answer.
Brilliant. So we are out of time for this session, but please do carry on kind of maybe picking the brains of our panel here. But please join me in giving a round of applause to our fantastic panel.